All right, gentlemen, what do you think of that? What about this autopsy? It is the key issue for the jury, yes?
It is, Judge.
Joey?
And you know what? And here's what I do. If I'm defending this case, I'm going to focus on three things. Number one, the Illinois State Police were called. Why? Because he's a Bolingbrook police officer, and they wanted to have some independence here. And then you would conclude if there's an independent entity, they'd look for any evidence to establish it's a homicide. They concluded it wasn't. You'd examine the autopsy report. Right then and there, you have a fresh body.
But wasn't there a lay jury that made the decision that it was an accident?
You know what happened, Judge? Yeah, there was an autopsy, and based on the autopsy and the findings, and the autopsy alluded to the injuries, of course.
But not as many injuries.
Not as many, and we don't know the bruising and when it happened or how it may have happened. But remember this.
It's easy to tell, Jeffrey, isn't it, when bruising is fresh or old?
Look, this is what the problem is that there was this coroner's inquest, and it came out with it being an accident, and now the state has to deal with the fact. You know, people have a common sense belief about double jeopardy, not the constitutional double jeopardy, but hey, you went through this, you had your chance already, 3.5 years later, you exhumed about...
This is not double jeopardy.
No, of course not, but I mean, the common sense, if you had your shot, that's what they have to worry about, plus the hearsay. Those are the two things that the state has to overcome. They may be able to do it, but it's a tough case for the state.
Joey?
There's a coroner's jury also, and remember, the coroner's jury also heard about evidence. They heard from the sisters saying he would make it seem like an accident. They heard from the state police. They got evidence and information concerning no struggle, no forced entry. They evaluated this, Judge, and they concluded after the evaluation that it was an accident.
All right, Steve?
Your Honor, there's something very key here, I believe, that needs to be focused on. Kathleen's words in a letter to the authorities describe Drew Peterson as a manipulator of the system, even to the point where he's been allowed to manipulate the jury. And that's very important because as a police officer, he knows how to manipulate the system. He knows how to cover up a crime if he did this. There's no evidence, Your Honor, and that's going to be a real problem.
Dr. Harshberger, you know, when I interviewed Joe Brodsky, one of the things that he said was, well, you know, she had vertigo, this and that. If there is no history of any neurologic problem or any heart problem, are they going to be able to introduce it and argue it now, so many years later?
No, that'll be valuable that there's no history to argue, but what they'll do is say that the first autopsy was flawed because they didn't do particular genetic testing that we can identify some cardiac conduction defects that could cause someone to collapse. The brain wasn't examined as thoroughly as a neuropathologist might do in a different exam. So there were some exam flaws someone may point out now to cause the diagnosis to be in doubt.
All right. And, Steve, you said that one of the jurors stood out to you that was selected in the trial. Who?
The 20-year-old.
Why?
Well, because he's 20 years old, and in that age, they're not biased one way or the other. I find it hard to believe that all of these jurors don't know about this case, but that's another story.
All right, to the lawyers, is Drew going to take the stand?
I think he's going to.
You do?
I do. I think he's very well spoken. I think if somebody can pull it off, he can pull it off. I think there'll be a lot of questions that he has to answer. And I also think he wants to sort of eliminate the myth about him. People think he's arrogant. People think he's a gamer. People think he has to take
They've been watching him for years. What do you think, Jeffrey?
You take the stand when you have to. I don't think he's going to have to. We're going to have to see
but don't you think, Jeffrey, he thinks he can convince anyone of anything?
As you know, I was in that courtroom during jury selection, and he was staring at the media. This is a fellow who wants attention. So we know that he wants to. But if his lawyers let him, and there's not a really good reason, that's a mistake.
Remember the word manipulation. He'll manipulate anybody.
You know what? My guess is he's definitely going to take the stand.
What do you think this new look is for, Judge?
The new look, and what do we think of that? Clean-shaven? What's that about, Joey?
He's clean-shaven. He's going to present to the jury. I think that's sort of the purview of what we're going to see.
He was wearing a sport coat, too, not a suit.
Not a suit. Interesting. All right, Dr. Harshberger.